the science of strategic thought and mental mastery defining neurocognitive. Intelligence. Neurocognitive intelligence is the disciplined capacity to regulate thought, manage emotion, detect patterns within complexity, and design strategic action under pressure. It is not simply the possession of knowledge, nor is it the abstract ability to solve logical puzzles. It is the operational integration of brain function, behavioral awareness, and structured decision-making. Neurocognitive intelligence concerns how the mind performs in real conditions. When stakes are high, information is incomplete, and emotional variables are active. Traditional definitions of intelligence often focus on analytical reasoning, memory recall, or linguistic ability. While these components are valuable, they represent only fragments of cognitive capacity. A person may possess high analytical skill, yet falter when emotionally triggered. Another may demonstrate empathy, yet struggle to maintain focus in a distracted environment. Neurocognitive intelligence addresses this fragmentation. It seeks coherence. It unites executive control, emotional regulation, systems thinking, and ethical influence into a single, trainable architecture. At its core, neurocognitive intelligence recognizes that cognition is biological, behavioral, and strategic simultaneously. The brain's neural networks govern attention, perception, and impulse regulation. Psychological processes shape interpretation and emotional response. Strategic reasoning determines how decisions are structured and executed. When these dimensions are aligned, clarity emerges. When they are fragmented, performance deteriorates. Neurocognitive intelligence, therefore, refers to the structured alignment of neural regulation and strategic thought. It is the ability to remain cognitively stable when others become reactive, to perceive structural patterns where others see isolated events, and to choose deliberate action rather than impulsive response. It is measured not by test scores, but by consistency of performance in complex, real-world environments. From IQ and EQ to NCI, the next evolution of intelligence. 20th century introduced intelligence quotient as a dominant measure of intellectual capacity. IQ testing focused on logical reasoning, verbal comprehension, mathematical skill, and spatial analysis. These measurements provided useful indicators of academic aptitude, yet they offered limited insight into decision-making under emotional strain or social complexity. High IQ did not guarantee sound judgment in volatile conditions. In response to this limitation, emotional intelligence emerged as a corrective lens. Emotional intelligence emphasized self-awareness, empathy, interpersonal skill, and emotional regulation. It recognized that cognitive brilliance without emotional control often leads to relational failure or leadership instability. EQ expanded the understanding of intelligence by acknowledging that emotions are not peripheral to thought. They are interwoven with it. However, both IQ and EQ remain incomplete when isolated. Analytical reasoning without emotional containment is unstable. Emotional sensitivity without strategic structure is unfocused. The 21st century demands more than intellectual sharpness or interpersonal awareness. It demands integration. It requires individuals who can think clearly under stress, manage internal chemistry, interpret complex systems, and design outcomes intentionally. Neurocognitive intelligence represents the next evolutionary step. It does not discard IQ or EQ. It incorporates them into a larger architecture. Analytical reasoning becomes one component within executive control. Emotional awareness becomes a regulated variable rather than a dominant force. Strategic modeling becomes the bridge between cognition and action. NCI recognizes that intelligence must function under pressure, within systems, and across dynamic environments. In this evolution, intelligence is no longer static measurement, but dynamic capability. It is not what you know, nor even how you feel, but how effectively you integrate knowledge, emotion, and strategy into disciplined performance. Neurocognitive intelligence is intelligence operationalized. The 4 pillars of NCI neurocognitive intelligence rests upon 4 foundational pillars that together form a stable cognitive architecture. The first pillar is cognitive control and executive function. This refers to the capacity to direct attention deliberately, inhibit impulsive reactions, manage cognitive load, and sustain focus over time. Executive function allows the mind to prioritize strategically rather than react reflexively. Without this foundation, higher-level reasoning collapses under distraction or emotional interference. The second pillar is emotional regulation and neurochemical stability. Emotions are not obstacles to intelligence, they are signals. Yet unmanaged emotional activation narrows perception and impairs judgment. Neurocognitive intelligence requires the ability to recognize emotional shifts, regulate stress responses, and maintain physiological composure during uncertainty. Stability of internal chemistry preserves clarity of thought. The third pillar is strategic systems thinking. This involves recognizing patterns, mapping feedback loops, anticipating consequences, and understanding how variables interact within complex systems. Strategic intelligence moves beyond linear cause and effect. It evaluates second and third-order impacts. It perceives structure beneath surface events. Without systems thinking, decisions become reactive and short-sighted. The fourth pillar is influencing architecture and ethical application. Intelligence gains significance when applied within social environments. Communication, persuasion, leadership, and negotiation all require awareness of cognitive bias and behavioral dynamics. Neurocognitive intelligence integrates influence with responsibility. Ethical alignment ensures that strategic advantage does not devolve into manipulation or harm. These four pillars do not operate independently. Executive control stabilizes emotional response. Emotional stability enhances systems perception. Systems perception strengthens influence design. Ethical influence reinforces disciplined cognition. Together, they create a coherent structure capable of operating effectively in complexity. How brain architecture shapes strategy, leadership, and influence. The brain is not merely a passive organ generating thought. It is an adaptive network continuously shaping perception and behavior. The architecture of neural circuits determines how information is filtered, how threats are interpreted, and how impulses are regulated. Strategy, leadership, and influence are therefore rooted in biology as much as philosophy. The prefrontal cortex governs executive planning, impulse inhibition, and long-term reasoning. When functioning optimally, it enables measured responses and strategic foresight. Under stress, however, the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, can override executive control, narrowing attention and triggering defensive or aggressive reactions. Leaders who lack emotional regulation often experience this neurological hijacking, making reactive decisions that undermine strategic intent. Attention networks determine what enters conscious awareness. In an environment saturated with digital stimuli, these networks can become fragmented. Chronic distraction weakens neural pathways associated with sustained focus. Strategy requires sustained cognitive engagement. Without it, leaders struggle to hold complex models in mind or evaluate multiple variables simultaneously. Habit circuits within the basal ganglia automate repeated behaviors. While automation conserves energy, it can also perpetuate outdated responses. Influence and negotiation require flexibility. When leaders operate purely from habit, they become predictable and vulnerable. Influence is not solely rhetorical skill. All are expressions of neural architecture interacting with environment. By training cognitive regulation at the biological level, strategic performance becomes more stable and less dependent on fluctuating mood or circumstance. The neuroplastic promise. Intelligence as trainable capacity. For centuries, intelligence was assumed to be largely fixed. One either possessed high ability or did not. Contemporary neuroscience has overturned this assumption. The brain demonstrates neuroplasticity, the capacity to reorganize. Neural pathways through repeated use and focused training. Synaptic connections strengthen with deliberate practice. Unused pathways weaken. Cognitive architecture is not permanent, it is adaptive. This principle transforms the concept of intelligence from static trait to dynamic capacity. Attention can be strengthened, emotional regulation can be refined, pattern recognition can be expanded. Decision frameworks can become more sophisticated. Through structured repetition and calibrated stress exposure, The brain rewires itself to operate with greater efficiency and stability. However, neuroplasticity is neutral. It reinforces whatever is repeated, whether productive or destructive. Chronic distraction trains fragmentation. Persistent emotional reactivity strengthens impulsive circuits. Passive consumption weakens executive engagement. Without intentional discipline, neuroplasticity solidifies mediocrity. The promise of neurocognitive intelligence lies in intentional training. By designing deliberate cognitive exercises, stress simulations, reflective audits, and strategic modeling practices, neural pathways reorganize toward clarity and control. Over time, what once required effort becomes baseline function. Focus stabilizes. Emotional surges diminish in intensity and duration. Strategic foresight expands. This is not a quick transformation. Neural restructuring requires consistency. Yet the outcome is profound. Intelligence becomes less about innate talent and more about cultivated architecture. The disciplined mind is built, not born. The introduction of neurocognitive intelligence marks a shift in how intelligence is understood and developed. It invites the reader to move beyond measurement toward mastery, beyond reaction toward regulation, and beyond fragmented ability toward integrated cognitive power. In the chapters that follow, the structure of this training will unfold. The responsibility of engaging it, however, remains personal. Intelligence is no longer a score. It is a system and systems can be designed,